foundations of democracy is public education. Ideally, it provides an equal avenue for opportunity in a country that prides itself on exemplifying the idea. But the future of public education is in doubt. With the election of Donald Trump and his appointment of school choice advocate Betsy DeVos, never before in our history has the premise of a strong public education system been under such intense assault. And nowhere will this conflict have a more profound effect than in Baltimore. Officials say Baltimore schools face a $129 million deficit, and plans are being made for cuts to both support staff and teachers. Along with the fiscal challenges, Baltimore already has a sprawling charter school system, which critics say is hurting public education. To help discuss both the local and national implications of the city's faltering public schools, I'm joined by three guests. Dr. Joe Hairston was the former superintendent of Baltimore County Public Schools. He currently teaches education at Howard University in Washington, D.C. Stephen Janis is an award-winning investigative reporter for The Real News, and Phoenix, a Baltimore City school teacher who has spoken out about conditions inside city schools. Thank you all for joining us, but before we get started, we have a package from Stephen about the current conflict over funding.
Our presence here today is to show our solidarity as school leaders and for our youth of Baltimore City.
They gathered outside City Hall this week to show their anger over the precarious Baltimore school budget. A group not often inclined to demonstrations, but now within an earshot of Mayor Catherine Pugh's office, demanding that someone fill a $129 million budget deficit.
The current budget season has brought with it a particularly extreme level of angst and has the potential to make negative, lasting impacts on our students' lives.
Roughly 50 principals of Baltimore City schools airing publicly the implications of the across-the-board 20% cuts to their budgets. The protest was at times emotional.
And William Packer stands with Benjamin Franklin. And Benjamin Franklin stands with Roland Parks. And Roland Parks stands with John Commodore.
But also different than past public displays of dissatisfaction with school funding. That's because there is an awareness that shortchanging education in Baltimore is not just about the fiscal ills of the city, but a result of stark choices made over decades, among them consistently funding police at twice the rate of education, and major tax breaks given to developers over the years, including a recent $600 million subsidy to Under Armour owner and billionaire Kevin Plank to build out Port Covington.
Last week, I sat down with a group of students from Patterson High School and showed them a copy of a past city budget. And one young woman looked up and said, "Councilman, I don't believe this. Is it really true that you all spend almost twice as much on police as on our schools?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Councilman, the message this budget sends is that you all are more interested in incarcerating me than in educating me."
Which is why when hundreds of students gathered last week in Annapolis, they aired the same concern.
That should be the number one priority of funding in Baltimore is education, because if we don't educate our kids, some of them will end up in jail. The school to prison pipeline is happening. The only thing they have to get ahead is education.
But the time had come to invest in them, and by extension, the future. This is Stephen Janis and Taya Graham reporting for the Real News Network in Baltimore, Maryland.
Okay, Dr. Hairston, let me start with you. You managed a large school system. How devastating is a 20% across-the-board cut?
It's unimaginable, quite frankly. In my 43 years as an administrator and educator, it seems to me that appropriate planning can offset or defer many of those critical decisions that are devastating to the young people. If you have that fiscal authority, you have an obligation, quite frankly, to be more responsible. And by planning ahead, it's no different than working out your personal budget. You know well in advance how much you have to work with and what you need to survive. School settings are no different. And to wait until the last minute to discover that you have such a deficit, I think it's irresponsible.
Now, let me turn to our teacher. Classroom size is already a problem, and they're proposing to cut staffing. How do you think this is going to affect classroom size and things like music and art education programs?
The arts are going to, any SPAR or whatever terminology they use for extra, anything outside of math and English and social studies, those types of things, they're gonna get cut. And directly, I have a kid going into kindergarten, and he could attend Mount Washington Elementary Middle School. Well, you heard the Mount Washington principal on the news the other day saying, you know, I might have classes with 35 kids in it. Well, guess where I'm not going to send my kid? To the neighborhood school that I live in that neighborhood to be able to send my kid to. And now I can't have my kindergartner go to the school in my neighborhood because I hear the principal telling me already they have to cut not just some teachers, but other essential staff, secretaries and paras and support staff. And how are you going to run the school? And this is considered this is a blue ribbon school, one of the best schools in the city. And so if Mount Washington's suffering or Roland Park's suffering, well, what do we think is going to happen in schools around the city, right? So.
Stephen, there is a lot of discussion and conflict over who is responsible for this crisis. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about the politics surrounding it?
Well, right now, a lot of the conflict is focusing over the state bailing out the city school system and what is Governor Hogan going to do. And there was a recent report that said the state is underfunded public schools by about $347 million over the past decade or so. And so there is a lot of people that have been in Annapolis protesting, saying, you know, the state has to step up and has to fund the city schools. There are also other structural problems that we'll talk about later, you know, one being police funding. And the other one, though, you know, that we should talk about is the tax breaks that have been given out around the city to developers. Those tax breaks basically create new wealth in the city that is not taxable, but the state considers to be part of the taxable wealth of the city, which is how they use to calculate the school funding formula. So save for the fact that the legislature last year delayed some of the implementation, we'd be even worse shape. So in other words, we gave $600 million tax break to Kevin Plank, who is the billionaire owner of Under Armour. And so if you compile that with the fact that the state's already supposedly underfunded the schools, it's a terrible situation. And I think it's a matter, right now, it's really being sorted out politically, like who did this? You know, it's like a whodunit.
Oh, yeah, please go ahead.
Well, it's just like deja vu. Wasn't it 10 or 12 years ago that we had Governor Ehrlich and Mayor O'Malley trying to cover that $50–60 million gap, and they wanted to take teacher salaries. We had a sick out without the support of the union, of course. We went to Poly. The union, of course, showed up. Marietta English, of course, you wanted to get the time on the TV, and all of a sudden they wanted to support the teachers. They wanted to take, and then we had the case that was through the MathWorks and the kids and the Stadium School and some other people. Federal Judge Kaplan, remember, and they said for decades you've been disenfranchising the Baltimore City School, and you're supposed the state owes the city $1 billion in back money, right? And we had a surplus that year, and no money came from the state, and we had a surplus in Maryland. And so this is like, this is the same narrative all over again, and it's unfortunate, but it happens.
You know, let me ask you this. Our Baltimore City Schools CEO, Sonia Santalisi, said that the budget deficit is not due to the mismanagement of funds, but just that the state is using an outdated equation to determine what funds the school should get. Do you agree with the statement that it is not a mismanagement of funds that caused this crisis?
I can't agree with that. I might agree with the fact that the state may be determining what the funds with a formula that's probably bogus. We've been underfunded for decades, right? But, you know, remember, she was part of the Edwards-Alonzo crew when she was the head of academics, chief academic officer, I believe, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then she quit like in 2013. Ashley Edwards took over for a minute, and then we had the other guy who left, and we're still paying. We paid this. So remember, they had a big budget problem. They had tens of millions of dollars in budget deficit. Remember, she paid herself bonuses. I'm sure Alonzo did, and a bunch of other people up there at the top, while they were going after senior teachers, illegally pipping. This was all reported in the Sun. This is college. They were going after senior administrators and teachers. They were hiring people through their make-believe, administrative program. So, someone goes to college, becomes an administrator, and then you can go through I can't remember the name of it, escapes me for a minute. They wanted me to do it, and I was like, how could I become a principal after 1 year? And I'm working with people who went to school, they have years and years of experience. There was a problem with the principals union about how do we pay people who don't have the experience, got the credential, but then we got all these experienced people, and we're gonna pay them. So this mismanagement of funds, of personnel, of allocation of materials, this has been going on forever. While they made that few $1 billion deal to redo schools, right? But we have no money.
There's a whistleblower teacher that said that the schools are being used sort of as a stepping stone, that people come from other states, do a year or two in the Baltimore City school system, and then leave, and also that they teach
like
for
a master's
America.
degree.
Well,
and
she's
they
exactly
get
right.
They get a,
There was more than there was the MAT program. There's a TFA program, which of course got a big contract with the city. It pays them a lot of money, and they get these kids. And the majority of them are white, often female. And all good people, I mean, they're really trying to come do their thing, but they come, they do 2 years, and think about it, they don't just get a free master's from Hopkins, but then they get full pay and full benefits. And a lot of these kids, because they're really young, will come, they'll do their 2 years, and they won't, well, they have to do 2 years after they get their master's, but they won't even pay for that. They'll leave and pay the difference, or they'll get headhunted by all these companies
bow out early.
who will pay to, so you see a kid, he's there 2, 3 years maybe, and they're gone, and they go get another job, a free master's from Hopkins in education, which is a great thing to have. It you can do a lot with, it's like a law degree, right? And so they did their time, they got their free master's, a little Ivy League school, and they're on their way. And most of us who are career teachers, we don't get that. So I was in a program in the late 90s that was supposed to do the same thing for teachers, career teachers in Baltimore City. And in the middle of that program, they cut the funding. We were told we could pay 30 grand a year to finish the program. But they were bringing in TFAers and MAT people. And I had doctors from NIH, 2 African-American scientists, which is a big deal, especially in, like chemistry and that kind of thing. And they were turned down by the MAT program to come through the MAT program, and they had doctorates, and they worked at the NIH, and they wanted to teach. So they were very selective about who they chose. Just look at just putting that out there, so a lot going on.
I have a question for Dr. Harrison. We spoke to a whistleblower teacher that said they felt that public city schools were being purposefully disfunded to destabilize them and make way for gentrification. What do you think of that statement?
Gentrification is universal in this country, quite frankly. So I wouldn't want to just single Baltimore City out. Unfortunately, there's a cost that goes along with that. And a lot of it has to do with money, the investment in schools, and resources. And you find in most cities, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Boston, where gentrification does take place, you'll find that there's a lack of equity within the infrastructure itself in terms of the systems. Those areas within the city where there is redevelopment, you'll find that the resources comes along with it at the expense of some of the more traditional communities, and unfortunately some of them end up being food desert, where there's just no infrastructure, no support that goes along with sustaining those communities. Then we need to take a serious look at in terms of our moral and ethic commitment to children, and I mean all children.
Do you think that these schools are being purposefully destabilized for gentrification purposes?
I definitely agree with that, and this is, I agree with Dr. Harrison, this is not Baltimore, this is a trend happening all over the country where people are trying to take back the urban areas, and what's happening is the poorer, lower income people, regardless of their flavor, are being squeezed out, and Baltimore County, Howard County, you can see the consequences of that.
Absolutely.
Their schools are being affected. They're getting a lot of lower income people moving into neighborhoods where people, are wary of that. Crime's going up. Baltimore County just changed its grading system, which I'm very disappointed in because I like the fact, I took my kids out of city schools in high school to go to Baltimore County, and I'm a city school teacher. It was hurtful. But it's because Baltimore County didn't play. If you were absent a certain amount of times, you got a letter. You're absent one more time, you're doing this grade again. If you acted up, you got caught with marijuana, you were in a program and you weren't in that school because we can't have you coming in high. They actually enforced the law. So to hear that they said they adopted the city's policy of you get a 50 no matter whether you show up or not, really kind of hurt my feelings. I'm sure it may hurt yours too. Because
what do you mean by that? You mean that
whether you show or not, whether you show up and do no work, you get a 50. You automatically start with 50 points. And to me, that violates COMAR. It says you have to be college and career ready. Yes. When we go to Howard, they don't use fake GPAs. So if everybody gets a 50 from the jump, and then a parent will come in, if the kid gets a 59 for the class grade, They don't understand that it's not a matter of 1 point. And so they think somehow your kid got 50 points for not even being here. Now you're haggling over 10 points. It's just terrible.
I think the graduation rates that they often tout have no credibility.
They don't have any credibility. They're dumbing this stuff down because it's a numbers game. You know, education has been politicized, and you know we don't want to tell the truth about how poorly our young people are actually doing. And it was simple. When I was coming, you had to be twice as good as your white counterpart. That's the first thing. But a GPA was a GPA, and so you busted your butt to make the real grade. It's important that kids know what's real. They don't want you to lie to them. We do the same thing with discipline. We lie about the stats about violence and that kind of thing. How can we ever clean these things up and get them right if we're not even actually giving real grades? And we know this by testing, right? Last year, only 3% of 12th graders tested on grade level for reading.
Well, it's a fuzzy picture when we look at public education in America today, quite frankly. You find many of our suburban school districts are sitting there with urban traits. And that becomes a dilemma. And at the same time, it becomes an opportunity for those critics who want to go in a different direction with regards to how they view public education in this country, i.e. charter schools, vouchers, choice, anything that would substitute the traditional approach to teaching and learning.
But I have a question for you. Is there anything really wrong with privatization? Like, do you think charter schools actually are hurting public schools?
Well, I think we need to be honest with ourselves. Private schools were in this country long before public schools. So that's not a phenomenon. What we have to be guarded against is the fact that there's an exclusionary process in place. And when it comes to equity, if all means all, if good schooling is good for some students, it should be good for all students. We're not seeing that. And that's where our challenge has to be at this point now.
Do you think charter schools are helping or hurting?
I think they're hurting, and I would agree with Dr. Harrison. The public school system is still an evolving creature in our society, just like our Constitution, right? And before World War II, really, it was 40% or less even went to high school. Right. So, you know, and we hear these graduation statistics every year. You know, President Obama was right. More people have graduated high school than ever before. But we also have to put a caveat. A lot, you know, more than 50%, you know, around 50% are dropping out. They come back, get their GED. So you got to, you know, those numbers kind of go up within 2 years after we see. But what's happening is if we funded public school correctly, most of those private schools, and they were started out private, were usually religious, right, or something like that. If we funded public school correctly, people wouldn't have to go make those choices.
Right.
When I went to school, all the stuff I had, and again, this is coming out of segregation, so it was an experiment, and they dumped a lot of stuff in public education. But the stuff now that I got in public school is now what you pay 30 grand a year at McDonough for private school, which is like, why? There's not even real food in public school, which shocks me. They actually made food. A cafeteria, they actually had cooks. You know, you could smell the lunch, you know, and for many of us, that might have been the meal of the day, and you got real food. So I think that's definitely been a problem.
You know, let me ask you another question. I had heard from a whistleblower that school conditions were unsafe, unsanitary, and even dangerous for both students and teachers. Tell me what a day at school is like for you.
Well, the whistleblower teachers that are up there and people who have come out at the rallies and the kids and the principals, asbestos tiles falling on your head, pot smoke in many schools, every day, mice, feces everywhere. I don't think I've been in a school, even a renovated school, there wasn't mice problems. No heat, no air, no water. It's just, when I was at Northwestern, I had 3 different rooms, and I had 3 windows out in each room, never fixed. Requisitions had been put in years before. We smelled natural gas for 10 years there. Call the fire department. Oh, it's negligible. It's probably a leak way down. I can smell it. If I smell natural gas, there's a problem. Oh, that's not a problem. It's natural gas. I mean, it's just, the conditions are terrible. And when you have notices in the main office for workers who come in to work at the school to wear protective gear because of lead and asbestos and other toxic stuff, chemicals they might be, or substances. That's for the workers coming into work in the school while you're there. When I was at Carver, my second stint, they did the whole rehab with us in the school. So people are wearing hazmat suits, first and second time, in the 90s and 2000s,
that's terrible.
while we're in school. The school floors were stripped. You could see through holes to the bottom. Oh. Classrooms, ceilings were, they were doing work. They're laying down tile, chemical smells, fumes, no problem. When people went out with respiratory problems, they would go to the clinic, follow this process, and they almost discouraged you to, you know,
That's incredible.
care about your health. This is
Meanwhile, yesterday,
pervasive.
And this is something interesting, because yesterday we were sitting there at the U.S. Attorney's Office where they're describing how these 7 police officers were indicted, how easy it is to make money in the Baltimore Police Department, how you actually could work 1 hour and get 8 hours of overtime, making tens of thousands of dollars, stealing, you know, in the city. And that's why I think this year, and I don't know if this has been much in the past. In the past, when I covered this issue, a lot of it was just school funding from the state level. But it seems to me people are finally starting to wake up and say, why is the police department running a $40 million overage on overtime when our school system is short $129 million? I mean, the police department, historically in Baltimore City, has had no problem getting funding. Right. And as a matter of fact, one of the things, when we always debate The Wire, right? Everyone loves The Wire. And Carcetti supposedly wants to put money in schools, doesn't have any money for policing. Right. Exact opposite is true in Baltimore City. Policing has gotten the majority of increases in funding to the detriment of the schools.
It can kill people like students with impunity.
Yeah, and when you listen to the conversations with these police officers saying, it's so easy to steal this money, it's hard to imagine when I hear you talk about the conditions in your school, and there are police officers who, on a regular basis, while they were robbing people in the city.
And to add insult to injury, don't complain about the conditions, because you'll be removed or silenced, or your evaluation will be affected. This is, some of your whistleblowers talked about that. It's standard fare. Yeah. I've been surplus 6 times.
And just explain what surplus means.
So I lose my job, but I still have a job with Baltimore City. That's how they get around the labor issues. You still have a position somewhere.
Is it that room in North Avenue where all the teachers?
There are a lot of secret rooms in North Avenue.
Well,
like the truancy office room.
So people understand, you go to this room, right? You just sit there.
I haven't been to the room yet. I haven't gotten the room treatment.
Oh, okay.
I just, I keep getting highly effectives, the highest rating, and then I lose my job. And there's always some excuse. It's budgetary, it's this, it was the fake pips, it was, so intimidation, retaliation, that's big. I mean, this stuff has been well reported. This is not stuff that, I'm secretly all of a sudden exposing. Yeah. Everybody knows this, because your whistleblowers refer to it, and more people come out because they're emboldened now. And so not only are you in bad conditions where your civil rights are violated, but they're asking you to violate the civil rights of the kids, because we're advocates for the kids. So if I have no heat, and I say to the principal, we can't be in here. If you can leave, I can leave and have my job affected. There's no heat, or there's no air. It's 100 degrees in the room. See what happened in the county when people finally got tired, right? It took a few months for the city to be kind of added on to the county air conditioner issue, right? But we can violate civil, no water. How do you not have water? Right? So these are really basic. This is not even getting to the stuff I think is
more sophisticated.
Even, this is just the physical condition of where you are. And the kids, and I was one of these kids, they're coming from rough situations. So, they're very smart. These kids they're very street smart. They come in here and then they see bad conditions at the school, and they're mistreated, they're discriminated against, they can see this, right? And so this kind of compounds their psychology. When they come to a place that's supposed to be safe, where they're supposed to be provided and afforded certain basic rights, and the door doesn't have a lock, the windows are broken, there's smells like weed everywhere, they're scared because kids are getting beaten up with impunity, there's no consequence. I mean, I can go on and on and on. And so if the adults are struggling with that, and I ask you, if you come to that work environment every day, as an administrator, a parent, a teacher, a student, when does that begin to take its toll on you?
It's very demoralizing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, Stephen, we have a new city council, a new mayor. Mm-hmm. Do you think they're going to shift their priorities away from policing towards education, or at least give education the same treatment and standing for their budget? It's
interesting, not given what's happened, as we reported several weeks ago, the mayor has allocated $3 million to hire 100 new police officers, because apparently out of one of the largest police departments per capita, none of these officers can make their way onto the streets. They all tend to be in administrative or office positions or investigative positions. And then, of course, barely a peep was heard when it was revealed that we said before that the city police department spent $40 million excess on overtime. So, I have heard the mayor talk about it. The mayor has talked about it, but I have not seen any action. Now, the council is a different question. I mean, you have, in our package, you had Councilman Z. Cohen say specifically that one of the students said, "You want to arrest me more than you want to educate me." I do believe that with 8 new members, there's more consciousness of this. But remember, the mayor controls the purse strings. So the city council is kind of limited in what they can do. They can subtract money. But I think within the teachers and the community and the school community, there is consciousness of this and they want change because people are starting to realize, well, we spend all this money on policing, it's not going to do us any good because it's not going to make the city safer, because it hasn't. But I do think the mayor so far has not done anything substantive to actually change that funding ratio.
So have city officials actually made any comment on the whistleblower interviews that describe
Well,
these
that's the other
unsafe
thing.
and unsanitary and dangerous conditions?
The mayor's office was well aware of it, and they have not commented. I sent it to North Avenue, which of course is kind of like dumping something into, they haven't said anything. So no, I mean, these really horrible allegations about the condition of the school have gone unanswered.
Now we have a video package so that we can listen to the voices of those who are most impacted by this budget crisis, the students. Are you worried that you're going to lose some of the city school teachers because they don't have enough money in the budget?
Yes, we are, because many of the teachers have helped us, especially us, because we weren't able to speak English 4 years ago, and they helped us.
That's terrific. Are you worried about losing some of the teachers that you've learned English from?
Yes, because they have helped us a lot, like my sister said. Because when we came, we didn't know nothing about English, and they helped us a lot in the last few years.
If you just look in our school, we go to Baltimore City College, there's ceilings falling in, and it's the bathrooms are all messed up. Only one toilet will work in the whole bathroom, and it's just crazy that we're getting more money taken away. So it's gonna hurt us a lot.
The system is putting more money into prisons than they are schools, and that money that is being put into prisons, and especially the prison that is trying to be made for adolescents, that could be going into the future of our children and me and the rest of the children upcoming. So instead of putting the money into what you think we're going to be without the education, put the money into the education and change us instead of yeah.
So we heard what the students said. One in particular talked about a school-to-prison pipeline. Do you think the concerns of the students that their programs are being removed, that their favorite teachers are being removed, and that the city cares more about putting them in prison than educating them, do you think their concerns are...
Students are very honest, they're very emotional, and they're very personable. And it would be unrealistic not to take them serious when it comes to realizing that the adults who are responsible for their care are not behaving in a manner that would give them the confidence that there is a future for them, that they are going to be cared for, and they will be nurtured. So I think there's a confidence issue that has to be addressed, a matter of trust, and a very powerful belief factor that has been crumbled. Somehow or another, we need to restore a level of confidence and belief that our children can trust the adults who are responsible for them. We see that across this country. Unfortunately, in areas like Baltimore, again, Washington, Atlanta, Boston, it becomes more predominant. And if there's going to be a future, and that future rests with our young people now, I think it is up to the adults to become more responsible.
Dr. Hairston, you have a famous saying that encapsulates your theory of public education. Can you tell us what the saying is and what it means?
All means all. What we are saying can cover the civil rights movement. If something is good for some students, it should be good for all kids. If good schooling, you can't have a charter school that's supposed to be wonderful for a certain group of students, but not wonderful for the other students who are watching it. We saw that happening with our magnet programs. Anywhere where there's choice option and there's a lottery and there's a selective process, someone's going to be left out. And in our supposedly free society, the opportunity should be there for all of our students to have access to a quality experience when it comes to schooling. All does mean all.
Now, let me take this nationally. President Trump addressed Congress on Tuesday night, and he said education is the civil rights issue of our time. Now, with his appointment of Betsy DeVos as Secretary of Education, what do you think his policy is going to be for American educational system? What do you think what kind of proposals do you think he's going to have?
I've been watching that very carefully. I do teach education, but education administration. Well, my primary responsibility is preparing superintendents. We are in the process of preparing leaders in education for the future. I decided I needed to take a very close look at the new Secretary of Education, at our new president, and the direction that they're headed with education in order for us to be in alignment. The picture is rather fuzzy at this point now. And to say education is a civil rights, well, that's just cliche. We've heard that before. And I think the president needs to come up with some more original to give us some indication that he believes in what he's saying, or if he's just following through on some rhetoric from another era. And if he truly believes in that, then let's take a look at the direction that we're headed with our charters and our voucher system. There's no clear indication whatsoever in any specific manner where we're headed.
I want to say thank you to my guests, Dr. Hairston, Mr. Phoenix, and our reporter, Stephen Janis. We had a lively discussion. Thank you so much. I'm your host, Taya Graham, and thank you for joining me at the Real Baltimore.